of, which is the Arab Spring and the Anna movement. Let me just narrow down to the Anna movement because we are in an Indian context. And you know, all of last year, the Tehilka found itself in a very strange position, which was to be in opposition most of the time to the Anna movement. And it was ironical because the people who were heading that movement, particularly Prashant Bhushan and Arvind, are people that we respect, who have been co-travelers in the journey for civil liberties and for maintaining social justice, you know, a particular view of the world that the Tehilka also stands for. But we found ourselves in opposition to the movement because while we appreciated the fact that they had raised the temperature on the intolerance for corruption, to say that corruption is something that we now need to combat, because for the longest time corruption has been something that is acceptable in the country as being a product of economic discrepancy and many other things, colonial mindset, a feudal mindset. But what really worried me is that as civil society, and that's loosely using that phrase for people who are positioned left of center, care for social justice, care for issues of constitutional values, we have always been impatient and worried about the fact that Indian democracy is beginning to be reduced only to the idea of an electoral democracy. We are all worried about the corroding of institutions. What worried me was that, you expect the state to behave badly, we fight against the state so that there's a kind of creative deterrence that carries on. But you always expect civil society and intellectuals to articulate the opposition to state power in highly humanist and liberal terms. But the Anna movement was trying to push through a legislation that was not trying to change the nature of power, but only to shift the location of power away from elected representatives to a select group of individuals, where it was even more confusing than what was their locus. Electoral representation is bad enough, but what would be the logic of why some people would be in power and not otherwise? They also wanted to centralize power hugely. They also believed that only political corruption, that corruption exists outside of yourself. There was no desire for introspection. And for all these reasons, and the fact that the media supported it so hugely, the fact that the middle class was so enamored of the movement, are all worrying signs. There is a desire for efficiency, there is certainly a desire for development, for better governance. All those are positive signs. But why it was such a confusing movement was that it was articulating itself in eventually very destructive ways. And I'm glad that they raised the temperature. I'm glad we've earned ourselves a time to think. I often find myself reflecting, even right now with just over the last 2 days, or last week, we've had such horrific examples of what can happen in our elected assemblies. We have right now the focus on Gujarat. UP is in focus where the most mammoth corruption takes place. And you worry that you resisted that movement, even as you see how corroded everything else is. But through that, I think we have earned the space now to think, to reflect, and use that movement to more positive benefits in the time ahead. I hope that impulse doesn't die, but I hope that we don't arrive at where they wanted to take us.
Thank you, Shoma. For this first question, I'm going to straight away jump back to the other two speakers. Let me just say that we very carefully identified the speakers. We have one representative from politics, one from civil society, one from media. But in this conversation, they certainly are located there, but we are not expecting them to be speaking for the sector. So, Harshji?
No, the larger, see, the conversation that Shoma has started, I hope we can pick it up, because I think it's really important. I agree strongly with virtually everything that Shoma has said, and there's some more things that I want to say. I will come back.
The mic.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. I said that everything that Shoma said is something that I agree with, and I would like to add to that conversation. But I think that you were talking about the significance of the year that has passed globally. We talk about the Anna movement and the Arab spring in the same breath. I think there's a problem there. Firstly, of course, I was told by Arab friends that spring is actually a terrible moment in a desert area. Actually, it's the worst season of all. And it's the Arab winter which is actually what they look forward to. But be that as it may, there was an Arab awakening. I think that India saw a certain kind of dissent within the framework of an open democratic society. And I think that's a really important difference from dissent against non-democratic states. And I don't think we can talk about them in the same breath. I think what happened in Arab countries was preceded actually by something that was much closer in our neighborhood. We had in Nepal 19 days of non-violent resistance for democracy, which to me I think was one of the most iconic moments in recent history anywhere in the world. I think somebody was saying that where is it a revolution when 1% of the population comes out into the streets? In Nepal, I'm told something that 20% of the population came out onto the streets for 19 days, non-violently, and secured a democratic government. I see movements like what happened in Nepal and what is taking shape across Arab countries as a really significant upsurge of resistance, non-violent resistance to non-democratic governments. And I think that's one kind of resistance. I think that the kind of dissent that we saw in India was part of a very long tradition of resistance to deepen democracy, to make democracy more real. India has been particularly fortunate, I think, in the traditions that we've had. The Anna movement has been, one actually among a huge number of non-violent civic resistances. And I think that to me, the biggest lesson, the specifics of the Anna movement aside, and as I said, it's something that I want to come back to. But to me, a very big lesson is that dissent is central to democracy, to the health of democracy. That just as much as the right to vote is, at the heart of democracy, the right to dissent is equally at the heart of democracy. At some point, I remember the Prime Minister made a remark that laws are made in Parliament, and it is the business of Parliament to legislate. I feel that he was correct in the most narrow technical sense. Laws are made. We've had labor laws because of the struggles of labor. We have laws of gender justice because of women's movements and awakening. And it is very much the right and the duty of citizens to organize themselves for a better, more just world. And looking back actually, because this moment caused us all to reflect in many different ways, I was wondering about something. I wondered, if you look back at some of the most significant things that have happened in the direction of social justice, why has it happened outside the formal electoral system? And when we talk about the right to information, the NREGA or the domestic violence bill, and so on and so forth, or going back further, the whole idea of displacement and justice for displaced people, all of these have primarily come out of struggles outside the formal electoral system. And I think that there's a sense that democracy, the electoral system is not sufficient to give voice to the most disadvantaged people and their concerns. And therefore the space for dissent is really important. The only last thing, and I'm sure to come back, is that I believe that the Anna movement was not a violent movement, but it wasn't a Gandhian movement. There's something that is very specific to the nature of Gandhian dissidence, which is based on, firstly, introspection, turning inwards, demanding from yourself much more severely what you demand from others. It is based on humility. It's based on respect for your opponent. It is based on a number of such on clarity about ways and means, which is not to say that other forms of dissent which are not Gandhian are not legitimate in a democracy. I think it was a completely legitimate movement. Another big lesson, and I'll leave it at that, was that the governments, elected governments, have always been dismissive of social dissent movements, and they felt it was possible to be dismissive, to trivialize, to marginalize, to not hear.
Actually, I wanted to start from where Amitabh ji left. और कुछ जो उसके पहले सोमा जी ने भी कहा, ये थोड़ा मैं इस संदर्भ में भी कहूँगा कि अन्ना आंदोलन से जो सरकारी पक्ष था उसको थोड़ा बहुत बुरा छोटा मोटा अपना भी अनुभव रहा। पहली चीज़ तो जो मुझे लगता है, खासकर अगर आप पे टॉपिक पे जाएं जिसमें लीडरशिप, मीडिया, सोशल चेंज तीनों शब्द हैं, जो कुछ आप दोनों ने विश्लेषण किया उससे ज़्यादा मेरे ख्याल से जो आंदोलन हुआ या इसके पीछे जो भावनाएं थी, सबसे बड़ा थिंग वाज द कलेक्टिव फेलियर ऑफ आवर पॉलिटिक्स। समवेयर आई थिंक अबाउट पिछले 8-10 साल में या 5-6 साल में कब हुआ ये मैं नहीं कह सकता हूँ। आई थॉट दैट some of our leadership became disengaged with politics itself. And politics is also understanding what's happening. It's a second part, जैसे सर जी ने कहा कि किसी मूवमेंट को कंट्रोल कैसे करना, क्या नहीं करना, वो बात की बात आती है। तो पहले इस बात को समझना कि अपने हिसाब से समाज में और देश में जो हो रहा है उसमें कहाँ बदलाव या दरारें पड़ेंगी, उस पर अपनी नज़र रखना, उसको संभाल के रखना। अगर आप अच्छे नेता हैं तो उसको सकारात्मक रूप से संभालेंगे, अगर आपके पीछे कुछ और मंशाएं हैं तो उसमें और तौर तरीके आप कर सकते हैं। So I found that most of our senior leadership, I think, fumbled, and they fumbled because they were not able to grasp the strong feeling in people, and B, the fact that something that they had started believing could be pushed aside, could no longer be pushed aside. So मनी ने जो पहले बात कही थी कि corruption is a way of life, it's a way of life, but has it found that kind of an acceptability in our immediate response? I don't still. बहुत सी चीज़ें जो हम इमीडिएट रिस्पॉन्स में भी अब मानने लगे, लेकिन वो कम से कम नहीं था। दूसरा था जो दो महत्वपूर्ण चीज़ें इस मूवमेंट में बदली और जो मेरे ख्याल से बहुत से लोग समझ नहीं पाए। ए वॉज द टेक्नोलॉजी, मीडिया की, और मीडिया के और प्रेस की, और प्रेस के साथ जो जुड़ी हुई और माध्यम होते हैं, जिसमें नेतृत्व को, चाहे पॉलिटिकल नेतृत्व हो, चाहे संगठनों का हो, जो दूसरे तरह के सवाल उठाना चाहते थे, वो अपनी जगह नहीं बना पाए। एंड दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, वेरी ऑफन आई नो लीडरशिप वाज नॉट एबल टू कॉम्प्रिहेंड, एंड हियर आई एम नॉट ब्लेमिंग एनी वन पर्सन, so kindly don't take it like that, but occasionally we found that, you know, if there is, for example, an SMS campaign going on, or if there was an email campaign going on, how do you put your point of view into a completely hostile audience in which you are not a part? ऐसे जैसे हम जहाँ आज बैठे हैं, अगर इन 1000 में मैं एक भी हूँ तो कम से कम मेरी एक आवाज़ है, वहाँ एक आवाज़ भी नहीं। एक तो वो सीखती और समझती कि हाउ डू यू काइंड ऑफ बिल्ड इनटू इट, एंड इट वाज ऑलमोस्ट लाइक अ ओपन प्लेटफॉर्म फॉर ओनली वन काइंड ऑफ वर्क। सेकेंडली, आई थिंक सबसे पहले समय विसिनिटी वॉज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। दिस वाज परहैप्स द फर्स्ट मूवमेंट इन द लास्ट 30 years विच वाज वेयर द सीट्स ऑफ पावर वर। बम्बई, दिल्ली, कलकत्ता, बैंगलोर, चेन्नई और जगह भी हुआ होगा, और वहाँ भी था। Last, I think, the last big movement which was there, where vicinity was important, was perhaps what happened somewhat to a limited extent under JP. So that was 20-30 years ago. एक उस vicinity की जो power होती है, अपने पड़ोस में जो हो रहा है, घर के सामने की सड़क पर जो हो रहा है, वो भी समझने में समय लगा. And I think that's why a lot of what we saw and what many people attribute as clumsiness or ineffectiveness of government. But मैं फिर भी पहली बात पर जाऊंगा कि 8-10 साल से जो और क्षेत्रों में बदलाव आ रहे हैं, जैसे सोमा जी ने कहा, हमने वो बदलाव अपनी संस्थाओं में लाने में कहीं देरी नहीं, उसमें कभी भी एक मन में और एक उसके पीछे कुछ करने में क्या अजीब सा एक रिलक्टेंस, kind of democratize institutions to bring in more liberal ways of functioning, to make them more open. और अगर वो हम लोग करते हैं अपनी बाकी संस्थाओं, for example, the kind of openness and kind of liberal way you can say in some of our taxation or in some of our ways in which we manage our finances, we are done to many of the other institutions in terms of both government, in terms of allocation of resources, management of natural resources, the way we look at our institutions. Maybe this thing would not have come to this extent.
Thanks, Sandeep. यूँ तो मोटे तौर पर मैं जो सुन रहा हूँ, आप तीनों एक तरह की बात कह रहे हैं. But let me still say that a lot of people, and I've been reading what people were writing, some people did see this as a celebration of revolution. On the other hand, you had loads of people who thought it was anti-democratic. तो range काफ़ी बड़ा था. तो ये किस संदर्भ में हम इसको देख रहे हैं? आपने संदर्भों की बात की. संदीप, आखिरी जो आप बात कह रहे थे उसको मैं उठाना चाहता हूँ. That given the neoliberal framework that we work with, where the state's role has changed from distributive justice to largely focusing on growth, और जिसमें हमारा प्लानिंग प्रक्रिया कह तो देती है इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ, पर इंक्लूजन कहाँ है नजर नहीं आता है. तो क्या ये कॉन्टेक्स्ट भी उस जो मैं कह रहा था एंगर का नैरेटिव है उसके आसपास है? Shoma, you keep writing on this, particularly the corporate, and so do you see something?
No, certainly, Amitabh, I mean, we are skirting so many big topics, but I think that there are some things that we need to draw from this. One is definitely the neoliberal, this escalated pace of growth that we've had. And that is why, since we're focusing on the media, I want to make a broad point, which is that everything that we do, whether it's revolution, whether it's dissent, whether it's protest, whatever you're asking for, you have to first of all understand the framework of what you're operating within. And I think the media has been really lacking in India in not attaching itself or not understanding what framework it is operating within. So you find, and there are many positives that electronic media has brought. But in India, what I do find difficult and frustrating is that the media has not yet understood for itself that what are our politics. You cannot be apolitical. You cannot be the media and be apolitical. And when we say politics, it's not about party politics. Unfortunately, in India, we understand politics as only being party politics. But so the Anna movement is wrong in saying it's apolitical. You can never be apolitical, and that was part of the problem. So the media too has been completely apolitical and remiss in not understanding the framework of how it frames the Anna debate. The same media will be very pro-neoliberal policies, has been completely unsympathetic to people's movements when it has been about land, it's been about water, it's been about tribal rights, it's about forest rights, it's about social justice issues, Muslim question, any of the issues that actually keep a plural democracy safe. You will find the same media has taken very conservative positions, And then and so as I was saying earlier, that why we need to think where we are, is that people like Tehelka Say or Aruna Roy or many other civil society people who have always opposed the state suddenly ended up speaking for political power. Because we must understand that even if we are pushing back the way power malfunctions, you cannot do away with electoral politics in this country. What Sandeep was saying, it has been a failure of politics, but you're trying to remedy it. You can't change it. What keeps this country safe is the tug and pull of of democracy. It's messy, but there's a tugging pull. So neoliberal politics, yes. This economic growth, yes. But are we understanding that? Are we really fighting that? Was this a revolution against that? No, because the class of people who fought and came out on the streets would be appalled if they had to stand up for the rights of tribals. The same media that was covering this, not even 24/7 but 28/7, has been against Muslim rights, has been very unsympathetic to the, not to the Maoists. I'm not saying that we have stood up for the Maoist method, but have been even unsympathetic to the symptoms of the Maoist uprisings in the country. They are not interested in takeover of natural resources. They have applauded the coming of, say Mittal in Jharkhand or in POSCO. They have not understood the issues that really underpin dissent in this country. So now when we're looking forward, I think the issues that we raise about what is dissent, I think what I worry about in our country and as a journalist is we fight for non-violence, but political power has to answer what is the space for dissent in this democracy. Is it only when Times Now or NDTV or CNN, IBN legitimizes a protest movement that is going to get political attention? What happens when thousands of tribals or farmers or Dalits walk and demand rights? In Chhattisgarh, you've actually had many non-violent gheraos of district collectors asking for ration cards, asking for food, asking for PDS, and the media doesn't focus. And that's when